Go into the world and tell every man that you meet, there is a man on the cross.
A Catholic Take. What you need to know right now. A bold synthesis of inspiration and information. Keeping you up to date on the news and issues from a courageous Catholic perspective.
A Catholic Take with Joe McLean starts now.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McLean. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. Hey, let's talk about, air quotes here, Cardinal McCarrick, Theodore McCarrick, the former Cardinal, who will spend the rest of his life not in a jail cell, no matter how much, abuse he has inflicted upon young men, let alone others. And the real question is whether or not McCarrick was a member of the deep state. Was he an asset of the CIA? Did he help to infiltrate the church on their behalf? Well, there is a book out from Mike McCormick, and Almost Insurmountable Evil is the title of the book. We're going to link to it in the show notes. How Obama's deep state defiled the Catholic Church and executed the Wuhan pandemic. Mike is going to be on the team today to talk about the connection, because he spent some 15 years in the White House as a stenographer, and he's going to talk about the connection of Joe Biden and McCarrick. What did McCarrick have to do with getting rid of Benedict XVI, with helping to set up Pope Francis? We're going to get Mike McCormick, to give us that conversation at 30 past the hour. Do join us if you can. Also on the team today is our good friend Brent Haynes, attorney, Catholic freedom fighter. We're going to talk about the first month of the Trump administration. Promises made, promises kept, to include in vitro fertilization. Golly whiz. Really? It's evil. But nonetheless, he is trying to foster this. My tax dollars might be used to support in vitro fertilization. That angers me. We're going to talk about that at 14 past the hour. But here's something you might like. Apparently, he's weighing the idea of giving 20% of whatever Doge finds by way of bureaucracy and corruption, giving it back to the American people. Are we going to get another stimulus check? What's 20% of billions? I wonder. Could be a lot of money. I have no idea. But all of that coming up at 14 past the hour. We will, of course, share all the show notes with you today over at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. But today, on this day, Saint Jacinta Marto died, and she went to her eternal reward. Let us ask for her intercession today. What do you say? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thine intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And now your saint of the day.
Saints Francisco and Jacinta Marto, pray for us. Francisco and Jacinta were born about 2 years apart to a Catholic couple in Fatima, Portugal, in the early 20th century. The two siblings and their cousin, Lucia dos Santos, spent much of their time tending the family's sheep. On May 13th in the year of our Lord 1917, when Francisco was almost 9 years old and Jacinta 7, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to the three children, having been heralded by 3 apparitions of the guardian angel of Portugal the previous year. Our Lady of Fatima visited the 3 children 5 more times, though only Jacinta and Lucia heard her voice. The apparitions culminated in the miracle of the sun on October 13th, 1917, witnessed by thousands of people. Francisco and Jacinta took Our Lady's messages to heart, offering many sacrifices despite their youth. And within a year of the miracle, Our Lady visited the two and told them that she would soon take them to heaven. After long and painful illnesses, Francisco died in 1919, and little Jacinta died on February 20th, 1920. They were beatified and canonized together and share a feast day today. For more about this day and others in the Church's calendar, visit thestationofthecross.com/saints and seasons. Saints Francisco and Jacinta Marto, pray for us.
And now your headline news. Catholic News Agency is reporting Italian President Giorgia Meloni visits Pope Francis in the hospital. The Italian president said that she found Francis alert and responsive, adding that he joked as always. He has not lost his legendary sense of humor. The Diocese of Rome called for the city's parishes and religious communities to hold an hour of silent adoration for Pope Francis's healing before evening masses yesterday. Despite his diagnosis of bilateral pneumonia Tuesday night, sources near the Pope and close to papal aides have said that while his condition is serious, he is not in danger and is making progress toward recovery. The Blaze reports Trump delivers scathing remarks about dictator Zelensky. President Donald Trump tore into President Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday amid tense peace negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Zelensky lashed out at Trump after he was excluded from peace negotiations between America and Russian diplomats on Tuesday. In response, Trump labeled Zelensky a, quote, dictator without elections, close quote, and pointed out Ukraine's financial abuse of American tax dollars. Trump also pointed out that while many heads of state have branded Zelensky a hero, the Ukrainian president has failed to hold a democratic election since the sparking of the conflict in 2022. And Catholic Vote is reporting woman gives birth to unrelated baby, sues IVF clinic. A Georgia woman is suing an in vitro fertilization clinic after discovering that the child she gave birth to was not biologically hers due to an embryo mix-up. The devastating mistake led to a custody battle, ultimately forcing the woman to hand over the baby to his genetic parents just 5 months after giving birth to him. Yet another reason why IVF is inherently evil, because humans are meant to be conceived in the marital bond, not in a petri dish. And those are your headline news. The gospel today comes to us from Mark chapter 8, verses 27 through 33. And Jesus went out and his disciples into the towns of Caesarea Philippi. And in the way he asked his disciples, saying to them, whom do men say that I am? Who answered him, saying, John the Baptist, but some say Elias, and others one of the prophets. Then he saith to them, but whom do you say that I am? Peter answering said to him, thou art the Christ. And he strictly charged them that they should not tell any man of him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the ancients, and by the high priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the 3 days rise again. And he spoke the word openly, and Peter, taking him, began to rebuke him, who turning about and seeing his disciples, threatened Peter, saying, go behind me, Satan, because thou savorest not the things that are of God, but that are of men. The gospel of the Lord. Laus tibi Christi. The Ignatius Catholic Study Bible would say Caesarea Philippi, a Gentile city beyond the northern border of Palestine. Normally when I read the account of this in Matthew 16, I like to show you pictures of Caesarea Philippi, to the very location, the giant rock there, on the side of which is both a cave and a pagan temple. And this is where our Lord has this encounter where he shows them that upon this rock I will build my church, as they're looking upon a giant rock with a pagan temple built upon it, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And there is this cave with an ancient legend that was, in fact, the gates of hell. So it's very fascinating. You should Google it and see it for yourself. But Caesarea Philippi was a Gentile city. It was named in honor of the cult worship to Caesar. The commentary goes on, you are the Christ, Israel's Messiah and King. Peter's confession is the climax of the first half of Mark's gospel, to counteract expectations that the Messiah would be a purely political and military figure. Jesus immediately instructs the disciples about the suffering and the shame he will have to face to accomplish his mission. That is why he has come, to suffer, to die. And any prevention of that means you're not on the team. You got to be on the team. You got to be on the team that says we want our Lord to suffer and to die so that mankind, you, me, and everybody else has a chance at salvation. The blessing that accompanied Simon's name, changed to Peter in 3:16, is not mentioned in Mark as it is in Matthew. According to one ancient tradition, this omission reflects Mark's dependence upon Peter for his gospel information, since it is likely that Peter would humbly omit from his preaching sayings of Jesus that exalt him above others. You see, I don't know if you know this or not, but Mark's gospel is really Mark just writing down the homilies of St. Peter. Mark's gospel is really the gospel of St. Peter. Did you know that? You might not have. Theophilus, writing back in the 11th century, would say, but after the Lord had accepted the confession of the disciples who called him the true God, he then reveals to them the mystery of the cross. Wherefore it goes on, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and of the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he spake that, saying openly, that is, concerning his future passion. But his disciples did not understand the order of truth, neither could they comprehend his resurrection, but thought it better that he should not suffer. I mean, could you blame them? I mean, if I were standing there, would you? Would I? Would we not say, Lord, no, absolutely not. You may not suffer. We would probably come and try to prevent it as well as Peter. But let's just take this lesson and learn from it. Let's learn from Peter's mistake. It is God's holy will that his only begotten Son should suffer and should die. Let's get on the team and preach Christ and Christ crucified, as St. Paul would say. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. More is coming up next.
Tired of your phone bill supporting who knows what? iCatholic Mobile is a 5G provider that supports what matters to you. With iCatholic Mobile, every call, text, and even that group chat you can't escape helps support the Station of the Cross. It's a network that connects you to what's good for both your soul and your wallet. More information is available at iCatholicMobile.com. iCatholic Mobile underwrites with the Station of the Cross.
Be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. Great to be on with you. Praise be to God. And support for our program comes to us in part by iCatholicMobile.com. Friend of the program. I've got a cell phone, and my plan is on the iCatholic Mobile team, or one of our plans. Praise be to God. And you might consider it. It's the only Catholic mobile company that I know of out there, and they have incredible service, but you can find more information for them at iCatholicMobile.com. And part of your monthly bill could come to support us here at iCatholic Radio, the Station on the Cross Catholic Media Network. And we couldn't be more grateful for their support. Thank you, iCatholicMobile.com. Coming up at 30 past the hour, we're going to have a conversation with Mike McCormick, who's got a book out connecting the dots between former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the Deep State, and the Deep Church, actually. The book is called An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic. And we're going to put a link to it, but that conversation is coming up at 30 past the hour. Do join us for that if you can. But we're looking at the first month of Donald Trump's administration. Promises made, promises kept, huh? Well, we're going to see our good friend of the show, Brent Haynes, attorney and Catholic freedom fighters on the team. Good morning to you, Brent. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, everyone.
Well, what would you give him for a report card? I mean, how do you rate the first 4 weeks of Trump's second administration?
Joe, it's been 1 month exactly today, 31 days, I think, because January has an extra day. I don't think it's just how I would rate him or you or any other person at random. Really, historians will, and political scientists, whether they like it or not, they're going to have to rate Trump's first 30 days as the most extraordinary and accomplished beginning of a presidency, like it or not, since FDR's first 100 days. Historians and politicians frequently refer to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first 100 days when he came into office at the at the beginning of his presidency during the Great Depression in 1933, and passed a whole series of legislative items and a lot of reforms to address the crisis facing the country then. And a lot of times, presidents are measured against FDR's first 100 days. And there's a practical aspect to that, because presidents have their most political capital and their most influence, of course, when they're new and they're still popular and they're still riding the momentum of their victory from the previous November. So they still have some political capital. But you can't turn on the news these days without hearing about something else the Trump administration has done. And a lot of it doesn't even get covered. But there's just no doubt that this is one of the most, dramatic, and whether you like his actions or not, one of the most effective and accomplished beginnings to a presidency in nearly 100 years.
It's interesting because along those lines, there's an article over at the Washington Post. I'm going to link to it in the show notes today. It says, in Trump's first month, a relentless effort to remake the presidency. They also compared his first month to that of FDR, and only they're excoriating Trump because they're saying he is taking for himself powers that don't belong to him. He's ignoring Congress. They seem to suggest that the president works for Congress and should just do whatever Congress wants him to do. I find that utterly fascinating, to be honest with you. I mean, I guess they're apparently giving Lincoln a pass, who took for himself war powers that aren't in the Constitution to, invade the South. But nonetheless, here we are in the Trump's first month. He seems to have done some things to upset the left a wee bit. Would you say that's fair?
Sure. If you turn on the legacy media, it's as if almost nobody in the Democrat Party, among the leadership in Washington or among their sympathizers in the traditional media. And look, just objectively speaking, there's no doubt that the legacy media is largely Democrat. That's proven by polls that show how they vote, and you can simply look at their coverage. It is a relentless criticism and attack, and just almost a therapy session with many of them complaining. Congressmen and congresswomen in Washington, D.C. are having rallies, leading rallies where they're outside federal office buildings where the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency people, have gone, and they're singing and chanting as if it's the 1960s civil rights movement. Only among the Democrat Party would people be upset when people in a new presidential administration go into a government agency and find out that over $4 trillion has been spent and there's no way to trace it. And they're upset about that. So, that's extraordinary. But, here's something that the mainstream, that you cover, of course, that the mainstream media doesn't. But Trump signed an executive order to address anti-Christian bias. Catholic Vote came out and congratulated him for that. How much attention did the Biden presidency give to nearly 500 attacks on Catholic churches that occurred during the Biden presidency? They were sure quick to go after pro-lifers like Mark Houck, peacefully, behaving peacefully across the street from an abortion facility in Philadelphia. But, almost 500 Catholic churches attacked, burned down, arson, vandalized. Remember during COVID, I know that you and I would go to a church where the men had to volunteer to stand guard outside.
Right.
Where was the Biden administration the last 4 years? First 30 days in office, Trump signs an executive order on that. And by the way, it wasn't just Catholic churches, and that order doesn't just protect Catholics. It protects Protestants. It protects all places of worship. So far, at least I'm beginning to lose count, so far, as of just a few days ago, Trump has freed 11 hostages in his first month as president. 11. Biden got 70 American hostages out in 4 years. Trump has 11 in 1 month. And remember, Biden got Griner, the WNBA basketball player, out of Russia after she knowingly took marijuana or marijuana-type drug into Russia. So he got her out of Russia. Left an American over there. Well, Trump got him out. Trump got 6 Americans out of Venezuela. Venezuela hates us. They hate us. And Trump got it done in 30 days. A lot of this really just shows what a determined, energetic, president can accomplish instead of just going along with the momentum of the enormous bureaucracy in Washington, D.C.
Well, okay, fair enough, but let's talk about the other side of that coin. You mentioned Catholic Vote a minute ago, giving him praise. I wonder if Catholic Vote will hold him accountable now over IVF, since their founder and president is now in the Trump administration. I'm wondering that because in vitro fertilization, as the Catechism makes clear, is inherently evil, and Donald Trump is just signed an executive order trying to expand access to it. So my tax dollars might now have to go to pay for someone else's in vitro fertilization treatments, which is inherently evil, as Holy Mother Church clearly teaches. What do we make of that?
Well, we make of it that we certainly don't live in a Catholic culture with an entirely Catholic administration, do we? We make of it that we still have a lot of work to do to evangelize the culture, to evangelize people in the political environment when it comes time to vote and to be active, and of course to evangelize and to pray for the people in the administration, and not just the presidential administration, but in Congress. You know, the staff members of congressmen, the people in the bureaucracy, you know, to come to a greater awareness of the truth and, you know, to move to the fullness of the truth. You know, there's a lot to do. This isn't a Catholic country. You know, depending on the survey you look at, a large number of Americans, sometimes depending on the survey, a majority of Americans support abortion in one form or another. You know, we have a long way to go.
But Brent, 40% of his cabinet, 40% of his cabinet or more are all Catholics. How J.D. Vance, Catholic, how can no one in his administration say, Mr. President, I don't think this is a good idea. In vitro fertilization has serious immorality issues involved. We probably ought not to do this. I mean, how is this not possible?
Well, first of all, that doesn't mean that they are not. But, you know, how often does Trump listen to somebody else? You know, no doubt that is a long-term project. But that's one issue among many just within the pro-life cause. But remember, this is the president that has been the most pro-life president, judging by his first term, since Roe v. Wade, which really means the most pro-life president ever. This is the president who gave us the judges, the justices on the U.S. Supreme Court that gave us the Dobbs decision. And, you know, get ready for the contradiction, but this is good news. It's President Trump's Department of Health and Human Services, and people can look at this on lifenews.com. You know, it's one place to look at this. But they issued a statement confirming that human life begins at conception. Now, I know you and all the listeners and viewers out there are saying, well, wait a minute, how can they support in vitro fertilization and, you know, say life begins at conception? Well, let's be glad for the victory that we have and keep working for more. And remember, you know, the alternative was a presidential and vice presidential ticket where the members literally supported abortion on demand up until birth, and the vice president literally endorsed and covered up infanticide in his own state as governor. So far from perfect. We're not here to celebrate perfection, and none of us are perfect in any circumstance. But there's a lot to be happy about in this administration. There are extraordinary accomplishments out there all across the front, not just on the religious liberty issue or the pro-life issue, but there's still, of course, a lot of work to be done. Our work in that sense will never be done, will it, Joe?
Well, I think we need to hold him accountable. We need to push back, and every opportunity we get to try to convince him to reverse this IVF thing, we need to try to do that. And if I applied to go to the White House press briefing room, and if I ever get accepted, that's going to be probably my question for the Catholic communications lady, Miss Levitt. You know, I'm going to ask her about that, so we'll have to see. But let me move on to this before I run out of time. Trump says he's weighing giving 20% of Doge savings back to Americans. I mean, is he going to be buying the affection and favor of Americans by sending us another stimulus check, which we'll also have to pay taxes on? Isn't that interesting?
Well, maybe he'll do that and wipe out everyone's student loans, Joe, even though the Supreme Court says you can't. I mean, right. that would be historic, wouldn't it? You know, it's interesting what they're saying about that. You really hit on a good point that we need to be very careful about politicians buying votes in one form or another. It would certainly be appropriate, in my judgment, if people who actually pay taxes got some sort of tax credit. But what they really need to do is start reducing the deficit and reducing the debt. My entire life, your entire life, we've heard how we're going to go bankrupt if we don't get that under control. And then, amazingly, under President Clinton's administration, a Democrat, remember, the Republicans and the Democrats worked together and they started making progress on that. And because the economy began to grow, we actually made economic progress in terms of the federal budget. We need to get back to that. That all started going backwards under Obama again. Politicians love to spend money.
Yes.
But that's, who knows? Trump reminds me in many ways of the Pope when he just sort of speaks off the cuff and says things that people can understand. One final thought, Joe. Did you see, as a Marine Corps veteran yourself, did you see that the military, for the first time in ages, has met its recruiting quotas again within the first 30 days of Trump's presidency? Because young people in America are glad they don't have to put up with nonsense like DEI in the military, and they're proud to be Americans, and they're willing to serve in a military where the president is patriotic and is going to support them.
It's interesting. It's at least not boring. We'll say that much, right, Brent? Brent Haynes, God bless you, my friend. Thanks for being on the team. Thanks for your insight and conversation. We'll see you next week. Coming up after the break, though, let's have a conversation about Cardinal McCarrick, the deep state, and the deep church. All that's next. Don't go anywhere. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain, and here are your headline news. Breitbart reports U.S. State Department designates 6 Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Yesterday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio filed Public Notice 12672 on the Federal Register, where he officially designated certain cartels and criminal gangs, including Tren de Aragua, as foreign terrorist organizations. The cartels in the list have all been tied to mass killings, clandestine grave sites, widespread kidnappings, extortion, arson, and torture, as well as the indiscriminate use of explosives. I like that last part. Just the News reports Trump backs House GOP budget resolution over advancing Senate plan. President Donald Trump on Wednesday threw his support behind the GOP-led budget resolution over the Senate's plan led by Senator Lindsey Graham. The House resolution implements, quote, "my full American first agenda. Everything, not just parts of it," close quote, Trump wrote in a post on Truth Social. Congress has until March the 14th to pass a bill before government funding runs out. And Open Doors reports 70 Christians found beheaded in church in the DRC. 70 Christians have been found beheaded in a church in the Democratic Republic of Congo in what's the latest devastating attack on believers in the northeast of the country, according to field sources. At around 4 a.m. on Thursday, the 13th of February, suspected militants from the ADF, a group tied to the Islamic State, approached homes in Neba in the territory of Lubero. All 70 of those kidnapped were taken to a Protestant church in Kasanga, where they were tragically killed. Field sources report that until yesterday, the 18th of February, some family members had not been able to bury their dead because of insecurity in the area. Many Christians have now fled the area for their safety. Yet another example of how we care more about what happens in, say, Israel than we do care in Nigeria, South Africa, or, say, the Congo. Let's pray for them. And those are your headline news. There is a book out that details the connections of the deep state and the deep church to infiltrate and to subvert Holy Mother Church and her will to help bring about the salvation of all souls on planet Earth. In fact, Cardinal McCarrick, the former Cardinal McCarrick, Theodore, who will never spend a day of his life in jail for the many, many crimes that he has committed, is at the heart of the story. And we're going to link to it. The book is called An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Church, the Catholic Church, and executed the Wuhan Pandemic. We're going to link to it at the stationofthecross.com/ACT. But Mike McCormick joins us now to discuss it. Mike, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Joe. Good to talk with you.
So you spent, what was it? Did you say 13 or 15 years in the White House? Tell me about that first.
Yeah, I was a White House stenographer. I started there as a contractor in 2002. And our job, we worked with a White House press office. So there was a team of us, and the job was to record whatever the president or the vice president or the press secretary said in the presence of the media. So the daily briefing, we have a stenographer in the room who records that, and then there's a transcript that the team types up. I would travel on Air Force One. I would travel on Air Force Two.
Wow.
The years I worked in Obama's White House, I was working mostly with Joe Biden and traveled around the world with him. And once he got out of office and I got a hold of the Hunter Biden laptop, I got a copy of it from the Marco Polo group. They said, you know a lot about Joe Biden. I had written a couple of books self-published about Joe Biden. They said, you know a lot about him. You should dig into this. So I dug into that, and I wrote and published on a Substack, Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil, what I found, and that eventually became that book behind me, The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden. And then about a year ago, just about a year ago in the spring last year, I was watching Alex Jones, and he was talking about this feeling of almost overwhelming evil. And I thought about it, and I said, I wonder what was the most evil thing that I experienced in the White House. And I immediately popped to mind was Joe Biden's very close association with Theodore McCarrick. They had a very close friendship. It was like Theodore McCarrick was a spiritual advisor.
Wow.
And by then, we knew what McCarrick really was behind the scenes. So what I did is I went to the White House website for Obama's White House and looked in their visitor logs, and I typed in McCarrick's name. And what I saw was shocking because he was very closely connected to them with meetings with Dennis McDonough, basically over the course of all 8 years of their and they were in office. And the meetings that he had led me to realize that he was instrumental in getting Pope Francis installed. The more I looked into it, the more I began to believe that McCarrick all along has been a CIA asset. He was groomed to be a CIA asset from his early years.
Now, explain that to me, because I like, how does a young priest, how does he have anything to do with official state, whether it's the Department of State or any intelligence agency? How does that actually happen?
Yeah, that's what's shocking. But, so go back to the 60s. This is the Cold War era. He comes out of this seminary. He was a New Yorker, comes out of the seminary and came down and went to Catholic University. And the CIA was known for looking into Catholic universities at the time for potential agents. Well, McCarrick's there at Catholic and he's a seminarian. And, there's a leverage idea what the CIA uses. If they find out McCarrick is a guy who likes having sex with men, he may be approachable to them as an agent, as an asset. And so he goes through Catholic University. What Catholic University teaches him to do is be a fundraiser. So he starts to go around the world, and he has the magic fundraising ability. He gets all this money from unnamed Catholic donors. And my question in the book is, are all these Catholic donors that he's been raising money with all these years, are their initial CIA? So he gets all this money, and then the first assignment they gave him was to go down to Puerto Rico. If you remember at that time, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Caribbean was a hotbed of CIA activity. And so I think it was a sensitive assignment, and he picked up Spanish language there. So then in the 90s, he makes his way up through the priesthood. He's raising money for the Archbishop of New York, gets to be a bishop in New Jersey. And in the mid-90s, they put him in the State Department and make him, the Vatican sort of allows him to be a State Department global ambassador of freedom of religion. And they start sending him overseas. They send him to China. He goes to China 8 times. It's not like he's going to, Haiti. He did go there, but he also went to China. He went to Iran. So he didn't go to the poverty-stricken places where, he would be doing ministry. He went to the politically sensitive places. And that's what he was doing. And he would go there and give out money to people, to the archbishops and things like, and the priests in the regions.
Yeah, Julia Maloney in her book, The St. Gallen Mafia, she detailed some of these, and I even interviewed James Grind, who was his case that got him defrocked out of the Vatican. And even James would say he would travel with McCarrick and he would have these envelopes full of cash. Like, where do you get all of this cash from? You know, it's like, was the USAID backing all of that? Like, it just seems crazy to me that everybody said they knew once the story broke in the summer of shame of 2018. But before that, if you knew and said nothing, then where are we at? It's like we've helped to make the monster that was McCarrick, that clearly, as you're seeming to indicate, that the deep state was happy to use to their advantage to subvert Holy Mother Church. So let me go back and ask you then, okay, so what exactly do we know of what was his involvement in getting Francis on the chair? We do know that there was a video after the election where he boasted publicly about lobbying for Bergoglio, but beyond that, what do we know?
So that's what comes out in these White House visitor accounts. And I looked into the McCarrick report the Vatican put out. And you have to, and my understanding of that Vatican report is it was a whitewash. It was a cover story. They were protecting themselves. And looking also at what Archbishop Vigano has written over the years, his accusatory letters. And I emailed back and forth with Archbishop Vigano. He's been very supportive of what I'm doing. He's in the book. A lot of it, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have this information about McCarrick and the Pope together. He confronted Pope Francis in 2013, in the June of 2013. So to get to your question, what happened was McCarrick had this long association with traveling, and he knew who Bergoglio was. And in 2011, McCarrick went to Buenos Aires and visited Bergoglio, and that's in the McCarrick report. But so then in 2012, he's going in and visiting Dennis McDonough in the White House probably every 2 or 3 months. He has a lot of personal contact with Joe Biden. He was the guy that was always front and center at the St. Patrick's Day events at the White House. Both Obama and Biden. He was always on the state floor visiting them for holiday parties and things like that. So he's close to them. He's close to McDonough. McDonough has 2 brothers who took holy orders. One is since retired, and one is he's kind of been demoted. He had a high-profile job in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and he's been demoted because he was covering for pedophile priests. So McDonough has a background in understanding the dark side of what was going on in the church. What happened was on September 12th, 2012, so the day after Benghazi, McDonough gives a speech at Catholic University. And McDonough's boss at the time was he worked directly for Tom Donilon, who was a national security advisor. Donilon was a graduate of Catholic University. He was also a longtime Joe Biden operative. So he gives a speech at Catholic University. McCarrick introduces him. So they have this connection there in public at Catholic University. McDonough's speech is about, Obama's this great guy. He's been great with the church, all this stuff. A month later, McCarrick goes to Buenos Aires. That is October 2012. In December, he goes back to Buenos Aires, 2012. Both of those are noted in the McCarrick report, the Vatican McCarrick report, but they're not discussed. They don't talk about who he met with down there or why he was there. It's just like a brief mention. Oh, yeah, he was down there, traveled there in October 2012 and December 2012. That's 6 weeks before Pope Benedict resigns. So he's there. And then what happens when Benedict resigns in February? McCarrick just happens to be in the area. He just happens to pop up and be in Rome. He's there he's in the audience when Benedict announces his resignation. And then he starts lobbying immediately for Bergoglio. And then it becomes this sort of behind the scenes. And remember, this is a guy who's been handing out envelopes of cash to bishops and priests all around the world for 20 years. And all of a sudden, he's the guy who's in the Curia going, we want Bergoglio. We want Bergoglio.
Why do you think Why do you think Benedict XVI would have allowed that? I mean, didn't Benedict XVI suppress McCarrick? That's what we were told, that he suppressed McCarrick, but yet McCarrick is sitting there in the audience as he's making his resignation.
Right. We were told he was suppressed, but he didn't really stop. He kind of cut back. I talk about that a little bit in the book. He got some cover from, the Biden administration gave him cover. He had high-profile backers, always in the government, and the Vatican didn't really want to disturb that relationship. I mean, he passed physically money on to Benedict and to Pope John Paul. I mean, he donated to them.
Oh, hold that thought right there. Mike McCormick is our guest. He's the author of a book called An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes along with his website for you over at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Coming up after the break, we'll continue this conversation. I want to talk to Mike about the perceptive differences between those administrations and compare that to the Francis pontificate. Deep state versus deep church. I think a lot of us are thinking that these days, aren't we? More on that coming up after the break. I'd be very grateful to you, though, if you'd share us with a friend. Might be a great way to help be on the team and support our cause, help us to grow. You can help by sharing thestationofthecross.com/ACT. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. We're having a conversation with Mike McCormick. He's the author of a book called An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic. We're going to link to this book in the show notes for you over at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Mike, welcome back to the show. We've been talking about McCormick and his deep connections to the deep state and the deep church. How many times did he visit the White House? That should be very troubling for a guy who had such a reputation as to molest many, many, many young men. I mean, they got him on the underage ticket, but it's the adult males that they want to ignore, and I think that's very, very telling. But nonetheless, I want to ask you, Mike, in your time in the White House, I mean, you got to experience various administrations. What was the Obama administration like in comparison to, say, the 1 year you had with the first Trump administration? Did you see, was the differences perceptible? Was daily work life different? Was the attitude, the mood amongst the staff, was there any differences there that stood out to you?
Well, in the Obama years, I worked with Biden, who was very active, very aggressive to want to be the next president. That was his behind the scenes goal. And so he was very aggressive. I went to the Vatican with him in 2016, in the spring of 2016. He was doing the cancer moonshot, and he did a speech with the Pope Francis there. Hunter Biden was on that trip. I got a chance to sort of walk around in the back rooms of the Vatican. Never met the Pope. Was in the auditorium when he did his thing. And frankly, to be honest with you, I'd heard from other White House people who had been in the presence of Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict's presence, and they had this, very deep reverence for it. I didn't feel that with Pope Francis. So
interesting.
With the difference between Obama, Biden, and Trump came in as a disruptor, and frankly, Obama and Biden had set up a whole human trafficking program that started in 2014. And Trump came in out of the blue. They didn't expect it. And he won. And he stood right in front of what they were doing with the cartels on the border. And he put up his border wall and started talking about restricting. And he did. And one of the things, and so that really impacted it. From that point on, they had to get rid of him. They had a whole thing set up. They set it up in 2014. There was a huge crisis called the unaccompanied minor crisis. All these kids started showing up at the southern border in the spring and summer of 2014. And what's really unusual, if you look back in time, Obama went to the Vatican for his first visit with Pope Francis in March of 2014. And it would be really interesting to me to see if when these kids started showing up at the border was soon after that meeting. I think that's what happened. Because by the end of the summer fall, over 60,000 kids had come to the border, some as young as 4, all of them parentless. And they were taken in by the cartels. Coyotes took them there. And the question is, who told them to go there? Who told their families this was a good idea? Somebody told their families, look, let your kids go to the border. They'll be fine. And they can go with these cartel guys. And they did terrible things to some of those kids. Most of them were 14 to 17-year-old boys. There was a lot of girls. Terrible things were done to them. So that became, over the summer, the Alliance for Prosperity. And this is where McCarrick comes in. He starts going into the White House, meeting with Dennis McDonough. At the time they're setting up this Alliance for Prosperity, the government in Honduras, who had been recently installed by the U.S., was smuggling cocaine into the United States by the ton. The president of Honduras is a guy named Juan Orlando Hernandez, was allied with the Sinaloa cartel. And he was on tape with DEA agents from February of 2014, his brother was on tape talking about how he and his brother were going to smuggle cocaine in with the government. So the DEA knew it. And that tells me when the intelligence community knows it, the White House knows it, and they ignored it. So who comes into the White House in July of 2014? Juan Orlando Hernandez, the drug smuggler. And that's almost within weeks. They have a series of meetings with McDonough and McCarrick in the White House, and that's all documented. And then that becomes the Alliance for Prosperity that Joe Biden made his pet project. In 2014, he rolls out $1.5 billion of taxpayer money to go to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, 3 little Central American countries that were basically the source of all these migrant kids. Well, that was just seed money to set up what became the southern border free-for-all with the cartels in 2021 once Joe Biden got back in. And that's the evil that was there. It was there all along. And Trump stood in front of it. And that's why they had to get rid of Trump.
You know, I can imagine a lot of people who might hear this would say, this sounds too fanciful. It sounds too Hollywood. It's too far out there. It's too conspiratorial. It can't be believed. And yet, I mean, I can appreciate that. Of course, it does sound, crazy. But at the same time, George Weigel, in his book, The End and the Beginning, he wrote about JP2 and how JP2 knew which archbishops, which cardinals, which members of the Curia were on the payroll of the KGB. He never fired them. He knew who they were, and he never fired them. He tolerated them because he thought it would be, it'd be too risky for Poland if he took drastic action. But he knew that they were there. Right. These were ordained men, and they were at high levels in the Curia. Similarly, Operation Gladio, it basically tells a sordid story of the origins of the CIA, which had deep Vatican connections post-World War II. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And they used the Vatican Bank to process a lot of money from these mafias to run drugs into America, et cetera, et cetera. It sounds crazy, Mike. What would you say to somebody who just can't wrap their head around it?
All right, so go to the movie The Two Popes that was done about Bergoglio. It's a Hollywood fiction. I personally think it's a CIA front story. But in that movie, they talk about Bergoglio's past in Argentina when he's working closely with the right-wing dictators. And that was done in the 70s. And then so he sort of comes out of this period, and there's a lot of suspicion about him where priests are killed by there was a division. Some of the church was going towards the communists. Some of the church was going towards the right-wing dictators. And the dictators were brutal. That was the silent war. Well, Bergoglio is part of that. He's on sort of meeting with the dictators. And that comes out in this movie. And that was called Operation Condor by the CIA. And they were the ones that put the dictators in power. So the CIA was backing Argentinian politicians when Bergoglio was a priest moving up the ladder. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover with the CIA, and it's time to get the CIA out of the church. It's gone too far. This thing is just disgusting what they've done along the southern border with Joe Biden.
Why do you think Francis hasn't been back to Argentina since his election?
I didn't know that. I don't know. I didn't hear that. I don't think I like him that much down there. I've heard that from people who travel through Argentina, and I told them about my book, and they're like, he's not really well liked down there. And these are just sort of tourist people, but, that's an anecdotal comment, but that's what I know.
Yeah, it's a complicated story to say the least. An almost insurmountable evil is the name of the book. How Obama's deep state defiled the Catholic Church and executed the Wuhan pandemic by Mike McCormick. You can find it on Amazon or on his website. We're going to link to both over at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. I encourage you to check it out. Mike, thank you for your time today. Appreciated the conversation. And boy, this is, it just angers us even more that McCormick got away with what he did. But thank you, Mike, for shedding light to it.
Thanks, Joe.
Check them out. An almost insurmountable evil. Spread that. I would be grateful to you. Coming up, we'll go into the after show and take your commentary. What do you think about all of this? I'd love to know and get your thoughts. We're going to read your comments and have a great conversation on the live video feed over at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich with Father Looney. Should be very good. And see you then. God bless you and God love you.